Leaderships. Our webinar is on Leadership for Equity, Micro-Credential, grounding the Tennessee Leadership for Equity playbook into a competency-based learning opportunity. And before we begin today, we would like to ask Emily Shoup from the Center for the Study of Education Policy to go ahead and do some housekeeping rules for us.
Hello, welcome to our webinar. Just a couple quick things for you. We have everybody muted right now, but what we would like to do is if you have any questions, please enter them in the chat room and we'll be sure to capture those. We have Q&A time carved out after each speaker, so you'll be able to type your messages in. I'm going to be tracking those. You can also, during a speaker, you could raise your hand and I'll be sure to let the speaker know that you raised your hand and have a question. And at that time, we would unmute you and have you ask your question. We'll be capturing all of the questions in the chat room. So if they don't get addressed, we can follow up with them later. And we will have some time at the very end to capture anybody who has any lingering questions. So if we run out of time and you don't feel like your question was answered, feel free to stay to the very end and we will hang out until you get your questions answered.
Thank you, Emily. I am Erika Hunt. I'm with the Center for the Study of Education Policy at Illinois State University, and I'm going to be serving as the MC as well as one of the speakers today as we talk through the development of the Micro-Credential series that we have done in partnership with many other organizations on leadership for equity. This webinar is going to be recorded and the PowerPoint in the recording will be shared afterwards. Want to take note to the generous funding support that was provided for this work. The Micro-Credential work was funded and supported both by the Clement and Jesse Stone Foundation and through a Department of Education Supporting Effective Educator Development Grant Program, SEED grants. And the work with the Tennessee Leader for Equity Playbook was funded and supported by the Wallace Foundation. So we want to give our generous thanks to these organizations for their support in this exciting work. The objectives of today's webinar are the following. First, we're going to provide information on what micro-credentials are and are not, and how micro-credentials support state, local recognition of school leaders' knowledge, skills, and experience. We're also going to introduce you to the Leadership for Equity Micro-Credential, which is based on Tennessee's Leadership for Equity playbook. And last, we're going to learn about opportunities to engage with Leadership for Equity Micro-Credential. To begin, though, I wanted to introduce you to our speakers today. And in order of presentation, we'll have Paul Fleming from the Tennessee Department of Education, followed by Jason Gordon from Bloom Board, myself, Erika Hunt from the Center for the Study of Education Policy, and Matt Clifford from AIR. To begin, though, before we get into information about the Leadership for Equity Micro-Credential, we first want to introduce you to the inspiration and the content in which the Micro-Credential was based. And this is through the Tennessee Leaders for Equity playbook. So I'm now going to transition you to Dr. Paul Fleming, who's the Assistant Commissioner at the Tennessee Department of Education, who will introduce us to the playbook.
Well, thank you, Erika, and thanks to everyone for joining us on our webinar today. As Erika noted, we are super excited to talk about the foundation of these equity micro-credentials, which is the Tennessee Leaders for Equity playbook, and give you a quick overview of the playbook as a lead-in to this opportunity for these 4 aligned equity micro-credentials. So I want to just highlight briefly, as we all know across the country, the importance of equity, and this is true in state ESSA plans as well as the universality of how to operationalize and focus on equity to promote better outcomes for all students. And so we realized pretty quickly in Tennessee that there were some themes that we wanted to highlight around equity. One, this does require a shift in thinking about policies and practices when we want different outcomes for students around equity. Second, that equity needs to be thought of as an approach and not a standalone add-on program for improving student outcomes, so that there's not kind of initiative fatigue happening around equity. And third, this ideally needs to be done at scale and embedded into the school and district environment. And as we often say in Tennessee, it should be in the DNA of every school to think around and think about providing stronger outcomes for all students. We like to say all means all in Tennessee, and that's certainly true for helping every student succeed and also every educator as well. So what that really requires is this significant shift in thinking that we'll highlight briefly in the playbook and also threaded throughout the micro-credentials, of thinking now differently about kind of where we've been with schools, which is often expecting students and families to adjust to all the practices of a school or district, rather than asking ourselves, how do we at the school district and state levels reshape policies and practices to best adjust to the needs of our students and families? And that requires, again, a different way of thinking. And we believe that the equity playbook in Tennessee is one way to help move that shift in thinking towards equity and away from kind of the notions of equality and sameness, as opposed to differentiating support that we'll talk about. And we believe that's a pretty powerful paradigm shift that we need to focus on, and that's what we have tried to do in the equity playbook. So what that means in Tennessee is we started with two things. One is a definition around equity, and then also around leaders for equity. And we know there are many definitions for equity, but we do believe that it means every student has the access to effective teachers and the resources, experiences, and rigor they need to be successful. And that's a tall order, but one that we believe has the opportunity to significantly change outcomes for all students. And that leads us to our next definition that we also believe is equally important. Erika, if you could, think about on the leader side, what that means for what does an educational leader for equity do to eliminate achievement gaps and also to promote success and ensure success for all students, by identifying and addressing both personal and institutional bias and barriers, and providing strategies to ensure that every student has equitable access to these four areas. And we believe that that's a very important part of our playbook in Tennessee, which is also, we hope, will be used nationwide through the micro-credentials and also the playbook as a standalone, to think more deeply about, if you are a leader, what do you believe if you are a leader for equity? So those were kind of the first two pieces that started with this kind of year-long project of putting together the playbook in Tennessee. And that will take us to this next piece is kind of an overview, because we wanted, again, to provide leaders at different levels, both at the school level, as principals, at districts level, as school board level, and community level, to think critically about how to actually take on actions to promote equity and to operationalize that at these four different levels. So here you can see our purpose, which we believe that it's important in Tennessee to, if these leaders, and if we believe and take action to create these outcomes for all students, as reflected both in our state and ESSA strategic plans, then all districts and schools will experience these significant positive shifts for students related to our 7 equity commitments. So I want to just talk briefly and to show you, these are the 7 that are in the playbook that we know, both in Tennessee and across the country, are very important to focus on, and to our evidence base and research base to show that if these areas are focused on, you will see significant outcomes and significant gains related to both educator effectiveness and also student outcomes. At the same time, we also know there are other areas related to equity. So we're not trying to say these are the sum total of equity, but rather these are areas that we believe are important and have significant, provide a significant opportunity to increase outcomes for all students. And you see the 7 there. I won't read through all of those, but we're going to show you just an example of what that looks like in the playbook, because for each one of these, there is kind of there's a significant mindset shift that needs to occur that's part of the playbook, as well as some actions that are aligned to each one of these 7 equity commitments. We also believe, and we've gotten a lot of feedback across the country, that these are commitments and areas that all districts and all schools, and I want to be clear, this is not just for a particular setting like in an urban school setting or a rural school, but rather we believe equity is important to be approach in all school systems and all school structures as well. So in the playbook, quickly, there are 3 areas. There's a action plan framework for leaders to walk through and develop strategies, because it's not a laundry list of strategies, but rather aligned to what you at the district or school level are trying to work on in the playbook. And so that framework helps you identify which areas to focus on. Second, we'll give you an example of these kind of equity shifts continuum that identify the common misconceptions around equity and how to move towards an equity mindset that's evidence-based and research-based as well. And then finally, there are key actions and resources for each one of those 7 equity commitments aligned to the role of a school leader, a district leader, a school board member, and a community leader as well. And so that's the structure both of the playbook, as well as we put a lot of Tennessee data into each one of those areas to demonstrate the importance of transparency for showing where we need to improve as a state. So I want to just quickly show you an example. This is the first part of an equity shift. So the first commitment was around decreasing chronic absenteeism. The common misconception is often that we hear educators say at different levels that at-risk families value school less and therefore do not believe in the importance of regular attendance. We also worked hard to create what we describe as an equity mindset around this equity commitment. And you can see that there, that the deeper shift is understanding that families do value their child's education at all levels, but we understand they can experience conditions that negatively impact regular attendance. And then you can also see some pretty compelling research that shows when schools focus on decreasing chronic absenteeism in the factors that they are in control of, they're showing significant growth related to academic achievement for those students, specifically from 6th grade on for that second research bullet, as well as at the elementary level. So that's just one example. So for each one of the equity commitments, there's actually a shift there in thinking. And so far, this has been a pretty powerful part of the playbook for educators and leaders to grapple with and think about how to make that journey from a misconception to an equity mindset as well. And then finally, we'll just show you one quick example of some leader actions, again, on that first commitment around equity to decrease chronic absenteeism. One is at the school leader level, the action about establishing a school-wide system for early identification and prevention of chronic absenteeism, which is shown to be significant when there's a system in place at the school level. And then also, what is a community action that can be taken to mitigate the factors that often keep students from attending school, such as not having clean clothing or supplies that would keep them from attending school on a regular basis. So we tried to really pack in for every one of those commitments a series of actions that can be used at all levels of those 4 different levels for leaders to take action. And you'll see that this is going to be reflected then in the foundational resource for these equity micro-credentials is based on the playbook. And this is hopefully gives you an opportunity to learn and now know more about how the micro-credentials will be structured to this playbook. So I believe at this time, I'm going to turn it back to Erika and Emily and see if at this point we can take, happy to take questions before we move on to the next section.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Paul. So what we wanted to do was give Paul Fleming a chance to just introduce you really briefly to the Tennessee for the Leaders for Equity Playbook in Tennessee, and which was kind of the foundation for the Leadership for Equity Micro-Credentials. And we want to just now take about 5 minutes to have any questions directed to Paul specific to the Leaders for Equity Playbook in Tennessee.
Okay, and I do not see any questions in the chat box right now, and I do not see anybody with any raised hands.
I see a couple. One is to me privately, and the question is, I noticed that Leadership for Equity definition references all students. How does the Leadership for Equity address support for teachers? Paul, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the actions in the playbooks that are directed at supporting teachers to do this work?
Sure. So, I think it's a great question because we don't want to overlook, and we talked a lot about as we were putting the playbook together about the importance of the classroom teacher and teacher leaders without at the same time adding an additional set of strategies. So for example, we have one commitment around increasing access to what we call early post-secondary opportunities. So these would be most often at the high school level, like AP courses or dual enrollment. And so there are strategies around teachers working together to identify students who may not be showing through typical measures potential to enter into an honors or an AP class, but it's urging teachers to use multiple measures rather than just perhaps test scores for entry into those courses. So for example, that's one where we believe that there's a lot of opportunity for teachers to think critically about what are the barriers and kind of gateways into honors courses or advanced placement courses or dual enrollment that have often maybe will leave behind students that could have high potential once they're actually placed in those courses. So thank you for the question, and hopefully will show you that's one example of how we're addressing kind of the collective efficacy of teachers coming together and working with their principal to identify students that often perhaps have been overlooked in the past for these courses.
Okay, we have a question that asks, how does growth mindset play? Is it a role?
Yeah, I think we tried to capture that really through these equity shifts continuum, for each one of these areas. And I think the foundational understanding is that, leaders specifically need to embrace a growth mindset, even though we don't call it out as a specific separate entity across all 7 of these, because as I mentioned, there needs to be different thinking now around reaching all students, and that requires, I think we would say, a prerequisite of a growth mindset to move from misconceptions to an equity mindset. Requires that thinking about continuous learning and a growth mindset, both about your own practices as a leader and also for students' achievement and student growth as well.
Okay. And we've got a question, Paul, on the clarification on the support for teachers. I think the question's more directed at how are leaders supporting the professional learning for the teachers and team of teachers to enact the equity commitments.
Yeah, so it's both in 2 ways. So one, we're hearing from principals in Tennessee, and I also saw I can relate to this. Another question popped up. Right now, this is a support tool. It's not mandatory. So we have a lot of districts and community organizations using the playbook so far, but it's not a requirement at this point. We don't have kind of an official pilot, but we are making it available in many different avenues and through different networks in Tennessee for principals and school board members and community organizations. But what we're hearing is that principals are using the playbook to actually develop professional learning in their building around some of these commitment areas, so that the guide to the playbook actually becomes a tool for increasing understanding around each one of these 7 areas, which is pretty powerful. And using it as a guide, as a kind of a framework for establishing professional learning in their building. And again, I want to emphasize that it's important that we all approach the playbook as not completion from 1 to 7 of the commitments, but rather understanding what your school data and your district data say and which one of the commitments is most applicable there. So that's why there is flexibility, and we're seeing different types of professional learning happening depending on where the greatest need is for that school or that district.
Okay. Okay. We did get a question on, is every school in Tennessee implementing this, or do you have a pilot group? And I think you answered that, Paul, by saying that this is just a kind of a resource that was created, that's being shared, that's engaging people in conversations around these equity commitments. And then lastly, this is the last question we'll take for this moment, is can we connect with schools using the playbook to guide their school improvement? So how do schools connect with this playbook, Paul?
Yeah, and I think we can make available, maybe we can add a slide at the end, Erika, before we send this out to everyone, of maybe some possible contacts, because I'm thinking even with, like Metro Nashville's done a lot of work of training principals on the playbook and schools that are implementing. So we can provide some contact information for folks on the webinar to contact districts in Tennessee that are using it already.
Okay, great. Well, and I'm going to add in as well that the national interest and attention to the playbook is part of the reason why we connected with Tennessee to develop a series of micro-credentials. The micro-credentials are not just Tennessee specific, but designed for school leaders, principals, and assistant principals across the country. So before we get into, though, giving you more information about the Leader for Equity micro-credential series, we now want to go to Jason Gordon from Bloomberg, who's going to give us a quick crash course on what are micro-credentials. So we're going to go now from playbook to micro-credential. There you go, Jason.
Thank you. And thank you, Paul, for giving us that overview of the Equity Playbook. My name is Jason Gordon, and I'm a Senior Learning Strategist at Bloomberg. We are an educational technology company. I actually worked as a social studies teacher and a principal for about 20 years before joining Bloomberg. And I did a lot of work, a lot of my professional career was spent advocating for issues around equity and inclusion. So it's been personally really exciting for me to work with everyone here around the Equity Playbook and figuring out how to turn those into micro-credentials. So I wanted to give you a little bit of information about what a micro-credential is. It's a little bit of a hot button term recently, and a lot of people mean different things. So I wanted to let you know specifically what we mean. So you can see our definition here on the screen. And basically what we mean by micro-credential is that you are demonstrating your competency by submitting a portfolio, a digital portfolio of the work that you've done to show your competency around that. So I'm going to jump in a few minutes and show you what that looks like. But basically, and Erika, if you can go to the next slide, what we mean by micro-credential is that we're creating an opportunity for you to show what you know, if you've been working around this area for a long time, or potentially even what you have been learning as you go through, for example, the Equity Playbook, and you begin to start to make some of those shifts in practice. The micro-credential gives you an opportunity to really show what you have learned and demonstrate your competency. And then once you have done that, once you've collected all of the artifacts that demonstrate that competency, you submit all of that evidence, and then it's reviewed by a team of experts who then give you feedback. And then once all of your feedback meets the bar for competence, then you get a form of a digital certification that shows that you actually have competency in that area. So once again, just to kind of sum up, all of the learning that we have in our platform is competency-based. We are asking you to do things on the job that show that you are working towards competence in this area, and that becomes both the professional development experience itself and the demonstration of competency. And because it's job embedded and because it's embedded and supported by technology in the platform, everything is on demand. So you don't have to wait till the beginning of the course. You don't even have to have a specific pace that goes along with, for example, if you did an online course, you might have a certain number of weeks to submit your work. It's completely personalized, so we try and fit this learning and this demonstration when it's appropriate for you and in the context of your job. And then it's also shareable. So once you've submitted your work and you've gotten feedback and you've met all of the criteria that are there, you get a digital badge that is actually, it's open badge compliant. And what that means is that when you get that certification, it comes, it comes with a nice little picture, but behind that picture is all of the data that you have submitted. And so it is specific to you. And so, of course, you can put that on a resume, you can share that via social media, or you could share that, with a supervisor or potentially with a future employer to actually show specifically the work that you've done and the competency that you have earned through doing that work. So just to sum up, and then I'm going to go into kind of what that looks like. So I just want to kind of show you, Paul talked about the shifts in thinking about equity, and we feel that this is really kind of a shift in thinking about how you learn and how you demonstrate your competency as well. So again, instead of it being seat time based, where you might get credit for doing a certain amount of things in a certain amount of time, it's all competency based. So you take as much time as you need to, or as little time as you need to. It's not one size fits all. We don't necessarily assume that you have a specific body of knowledge or that you learn a specific way. We want you to come to the platform wherever you are, and we want to give you all of the tools that you need to learn what you need to do, and then to be able to demonstrate that as you need. And as I show the platform, you'll see some of the ways in which we do that. If you can back up just a little bit, Eric, I just wanted to emphasize those last couple of bullets there. Again, it's available on demand, so we sort of meet you where you are when you need it. It's job embedded, so we ask all of the artifacts have to do with what you're currently doing in your role, and then finally, of course, it's learning by doing. So we're not going to give you a bunch of articles and then have you write a dissertation on that or something like that. We want you to actually be doing using some of the strategies that are in the equity playbook and really understanding those and seeing the outcomes of doing that and then reflecting on it. Okay, so what does all of this actually look like in the platform? Erika, if you can go to the next slide. So when you log in, it's like many other platforms where you have your own portfolio, and you can sort of manage lots of things from there. You can manage your profile, which has space for you to put some information about yourself, et cetera, et cetera. You can manage all of the different things that you're working on. So it may be that you're just working on one micro-credential, or it may be that you're working on multiple micro-credentials. Because again, it's job embedded, and so if there are multiple areas in which it's appropriate for you to be collecting artifacts and doing specific things, you may be working on multiple micro-credentials at the same time, and we help you to kind of manage what that looks like, what you're working on, all of the evidence that you're collecting. You can manage, various different milestones and timelines that you may have to make sure that you're staying on track, collecting your artifacts, and you can manage the discussions that you have with other folks. So anybody else who's doing those micro-credentials becomes part of an online community, and there are discussion boards that you can share some of the work that you've been doing. You can ask questions, and you can learn that way as well. So once you actually jump into a micro-credential itself, next slide, please. I know it's a little hard to see because it's all very small there, but you can, once you jump into that micro-credential, it will show you very specifically what the expectations are and what the requirements are, so that as you're going along and you're learning and you're implementing some of these things, you can see the specifics of what you need to submit in order to get that certification. And in addition to that, you can see on the right side of the slide there, we link all of those requirements to specific resources and learning experiences right there in the platform as well. So again, regardless of how experienced you might be in a specific topic, we try and provide ways for you to connect to the learnings that you need to go through when you need to go through them. So the Tennessee Playbook will be in there, of course, and you'll have access to that, but then you'll also have access to other articles and videos and other suggestions of experiences that can help to enrich the learning so that as you're actually working on creating these artifacts and creating this portfolio, you have all the resources that you need. And then finally, next slide, please. I just want to say that we also offer lots of tools for you to be able to create those artifacts as well. So as you're working on collecting those artifacts and working on creating those artifacts, we give you a tool sort of like Google Docs where you can type in and it saves automatically, and you can share that information with other folks in your network, have discussions about it. You can upload documents, you can upload videos or lesson plans or meeting notes, anything that would go towards showing your competency in that area. And the platform also offers tools for you to be able to annotate, make notes, kind of mock up various different things so that you can make it very clear what your experiences were, what you've learned, and how you are competent in that area. We provide scoring rubrics so that you have a very transparent look into the specifics of what our experts are looking for to give you feedback. And then once you think that everything is perfect, you've got everything as you need it, you hit that submit button, and you don't have to upload any other files or email anyone or fill out any forms. You just hit that submit, and all of your evidence is then sent to an expert to review. They'll give you feedback, usually within a couple of weeks. And then if you've met the criteria, then you earn your micro-credential. So again, that's a very high-level overview of what a micro-credential is and how that looks in the platform. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Okay, so thank you, Jason, very much. We're going to take just a few questions right now. I'm looking through some of the questions, and I think they will be answered in the next presentation. But just want to, one of the questions is there not a standard process of receiving each micro-credential? Is it just a matter of collecting evidence and someone evaluates whether it qualifies or not? Can you talk a little bit about the process for receiving information and the scoring?
Sure. So basically, what we've spent a lot of time doing over the past, actually almost year now, I guess, with the folks at Tennessee and with a team of people thinking about what is really important around equity, is to come up with a list of things that will help you show competency. And all of our micro-credentials have a specific structure. It uses what we call the ADDIE model. We didn't invent the ADDIE model. It's something that is out there. It's essentially a model for a cycle of inquiry. So what we do is we have you analyze kind of where you are with regard to your practice, in this case around equity. And typically we have you give us some feedback about what your experiences have been, where you want to grow, et cetera, et cetera. And then using that information, you typically will design or develop something that you will do in order to show your competency. Now, there are specific requirements for that, so it's sort of not free form, like, oh, I'm gonna just make up what I'm going to do in order to show my competency. There are requirements, but again, we want to make sure that those requirements are appropriate to what you're doing in your role. And so that's the next step. And then, of course, once you have designed the process that you're going to do or the plan that you're going to use, and you've developed any resources that you need in order to carry out that plan, then we have you implement that plan. And this is where you will collect a lot of your actual artifacts. So again, those might be videos of you speaking to your staff. It might be staff meeting notes. It might be emails that you send out to staff, sort of explaining what what a new initiative might be, and that type of thing. And then the final requirement is typically an evaluation. So how did it go? Did you meet the goals that you set out in your plan design? And what types of things might you do next time to improve it even more? So that got a little bit more into the weeds than I expected there, but hopefully that gives you an idea of the kinds of things that you would need to submit in order to earn this micro-credential. And then once again, all of the requirements, all of the scoring rubrics are there for you to see. And basically our experts then look at the stuff that you've submitted, and they give you specific feedback actually on each of those different steps, on your analysis, your design, your implementation, and your evaluation, so that there's really a lot of information for you to use to improve your practice.
Okay, thank you, Jason. The other questions from the chat box I think are going to be answered in the next presentation. So for the sake of time, I'm going to go over now and just talk about the Leadership for Equity Micro-Credential series that we created in partnership with Bloomberg and with the Tennessee Department of Education and the folks in Tennessee who were involved with the Equity Playbook design. What we developed, the Leadership for Equity Micro-Credential series, was developed in Illinois. We direct a federal grant, a seed grant, and as part of that grant scope of work, we put in the intent to develop a series of micro-credentials. One of them was on equity, and when we were developing the content for this and looking for content out there, we first and foremost kept coming to the playbook content. And really realizing, even though it was developed for Tennessee, that it just had such application to our work in Illinois. So the original intent of the Leadership for Equity Micro-Credential series was to support the work of school leaders in Illinois and then in partnership with Tennessee. So we designed this first and foremost with the ideas of school leaders, and that's assistant principals and principals in both states. As we got into the work, though, we realized that this had just much more of a national scope. So we really wanted to make sure that how we were taking the Tennessee playbook and really applying it in more of a generalized lens could be applicable to leaders across the country. I do want to note, though, the audience for the Leadership for Equity Micro-Credential is principals and assistant principals. The playbook does a great job of really parceling out activities or actions by principals, central administrators, school boards, and community members. But in order to have a focused intent around this, we really had to focus only on principals and assistant principals. So those that we're recruiting for the pilot is only principals and assistant principals, and that's who this micro-credential series is targeted to. We are getting a lot of interest about this being offered for central administrators, and with that in mind, may, as a next step, develop the series of micro-credentials for different audiences, like a specialized series for school administrators, maybe even a specialized series for other groups of educators that are applicable to this. And the how is that we've developed this Leadership for Equity Micro-Credential series in partnership with Bloomberg, because we wanted to be involved in the design and content And that includes, you know, the activities. We've worked on the rubrics, and we'll be partnering with Bloomboard on the training of their assessors. But after that, the Micro-Credential series is going to be housed on Bloomboard's platform, which then makes it accessible to any school leader that wants to take this Micro-Credential for a fee to Bloomboard. So it was really important to us that this be something that would serve our work in Illinois and in Tennessee. But by partnering with a national partner like Bloomboard, we can really offer this out to school leaders across the country, because we knew once people heard about the work that we were doing, there just kept being a growing interest in people being involved. And so this allows us to really scale it out to a bigger audience. There was a question on grain size and or the size of this Micro-Credential. And as we developed this, this is developed for what we anticipate would take a leader about, a principal or assistant principal, about 12 weeks. So in Micro-Credential land, we call this grain size. And we had to be really cognizant to this because when you do something like this, it can really grow and grow. And we didn't want this to turn into a graduate course per se, but something that's like just-in-time training for school leaders that can help their work and equity in their schools. So that's another reason why we had to really keep this focused on the role of principals and assistant principals. The design process for this, we developed a design team, and it was made up from individuals of our work in Illinois and as well as those in Tennessee that were involved with their Leader for Equity playbook. And then along the way, we also brought in some other kind of key experts around the country who helped us enhance each of the pieces of this. We held 3 design team meetings, and these were 2-day meetings where we really rolled up our sleeves and worked on the Micro-Credentials. We built them, we then unpacked them, and we built them again. And so there was a lot of ebb and flow around this process, because not only were we developing something that we wanted to be rigorous but also relevant, but we know that equity is also a tougher topic. So that in itself made the work even more important, because we wanted to be something that's not just a learning experience for principals and assistant principals, but something that can support, enhance, or even move their practices. We also compiled a lot of resources. We did a crosswalk. We did a crosswalk with the new national standards, the PSEL, and we crosswalked this with the Tennessee Leader for Equity playbook standards, and also with our Illinois state accountability standards, which is the Illinois quality framework in Illinois, because we wanted to make sure that in developing this resource, it was aligned with the focus of what schools are working on right now. One of the other added benefits and justifications for why we chose Bloomboard to work with on this is that Bloomboard is working in partnership with AAR to create a cluster of Micro-Credentials that are all around the new PSEL, the new National School Leader Standards. And so our equity cluster, which is 4 Micro-Credentials, will then fit into that larger cluster of Micro-Credentials around the PSEL standards. So we see that this is not just, you know, this is kind of a piece that fits into a larger, larger component that'll be useful to us in Illinois, but also nationally. And as Jason mentioned, these Leadership for Equity Micro-Credential framework follows the ADDIE process. So that's analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. And as Jason mentioned, the assessments in the Micro-Credentials will be reviewed and scored by a panel of national experts. So the best way to describe this process of these Micro-Credentials is a lot similar to the National Board Certification process. This is a list right here of the Micro-Credential design team, so you can just kind of get a snapshot of who all was involved. And we really made sure to bring in people at all sorts of levels, including higher ed, K-12 schools, leaders, principals, superintendents. We had a superintendent involved with this, Carmen Aola, who's really well known in the equity and has turned around schools using this equity work. So she was a key voice in this, and we had, you know, urban as well as rural voices in this work. as well as some key people around the country, like at Radford University, who's really involved in developing a series of micro-credentials that are, you know, really evidence-based. And so we wanted to bring in people that would really push our thinking on this to make sure that we could come up with the best product possible. This slide right here is kind of a draft, a snapshot of the what these 4 micro-credentials look like. And I say draft on here because Matt Clifford will share with you shortly the process of how we are validating these micro-credentials. And right now, AIR is doing a series of focus groups with principals around the micro-credentials. As you can see from here, here's the competency that the principals will be assessed on. And here is the ADDIE process, so the steps that they will do around this. We also have, you can see here the alignment to the standards. IBAM refers to our Illinois standards, and each of these are a separate micro-credential. So our goal is that you take one of these and get the badge. So it's not a package. We don't have an order for this, although this is kind of the order that we recommend. This one right here, Exploring and Deepening an Equity Mindset, is really kind of the foundational one. But there is nothing that would prohibit a principal or assistant principal from coming in and taking them at their, you know, to prioritize which ones they want to take based on what their need is. In Illinois, we are working on trying to get professional development credit for each of these 4. I know Tennessee has developed, is going to be awarding their professional development credit. And we've talked to organizations, institutions, and others across the country that are thinking of ways that they might be able to fold this into their certification or licensure processes. We encourage that, but this is not designed for those purposes specifically, but it's also designed where it could be something that could satisfy that. We wanted to keep it really broad in that sense. Now, for the sake of time, I'm looking at my clock, my watch right now, and I would like to get to the opportunity where Matt Clifford can share a little bit about the evaluation, and then we can go ahead and answer questions collectively if that's okay. I see that we have about 10 minutes left till 1 o'clock, and we want to make sure we get all of the content in. Is that okay, Matt?
That sounds good to me.
Okay, so now Matt Clifford from AIR is going to talk about the research process around validating our micro-credentials.
Sure. Thanks very much, Erika. My name is Matthew Clifford. I work at American Institutes for Research, where I'm a principal researcher. I've spent the past 15 years examining principal professional development, preparation, and evaluation. And we are very concerned at AIR about providing the most rigorous tools and products and assessment instruments possible so that people have great tools to use in the field. And so we're really pleased to be involved with the Leadership for Equity Micro-Credential design team. We think it's an excellent opportunity to provide some much needed recognition for the work that principals, assistant principals, and other leaders are doing in the field around equity, and to really validate their learning experience with a micro-credential, and which will result in a badge, as Jason said, that recognizes their skills and abilities. When we get into that type of work, though, it's always important to do some sort of validation so that the principals and assistant principals themselves understand that completion of the micro-credential represents a significant amount of learning, and that the work that they're doing through the micro-credentials represents a Leadership for Equity skill package. And when they do decide to put that on their resumes, other people can recognize that as well and feel certain that that this person has a certain skill set and mindset to do the work of good school leaders. That's where strong research design comes into play. And so the design team and AIR are working together to complete 3 different studies on the Leadership for Equity micro-credential. The first leadership study will take, the first validation study will take a look at content validity. Content validity ask questions about do the competencies embedded in the micro-credentials represent essential tasks for principals' work as equity leaders? And then if the principals exhibit these competencies, are they considered to be strong leaders in the equity domain? And then finally, we want to make sure that the micro-credentials focus in on the most essential skills and competencies necessary to lead, because we know that principals have a limited amount of time to engage in professional development, and so the micro-credentials should focus on the most essential things. Right now, we're doing focus groups in Illinois and soon in Tennessee of 24 experienced principals, people who have strong reputations for leadership for equity and have a deep understanding of the educational equity mindset, to take a look at the initial drafts of micro-credentials, the competencies and the assessments themselves, and also the artifacts that would be submitted to recognize micro-credential, the competencies and skills. Once we complete these focus groups, this is a recognition of some content validity. We provide that information back to the design team so that they can continue to refine the micro-credentials and produce a pilot micro-credential in February, which will be the next section of our validation work. If you can move the slide, Erika. During the pilot, and we're recruiting for this pilot nationally, what we're hoping to do is examine construct validity and usability of the micro-credential. Construct validity examines how the competencies and their ratings tend to cluster together to see if they're independent and whether the evidence aligns well with the results in the ratings. And then usability takes a look at people's experience with the micro-credential platform and how learning fits into the principal or assistant principal's work days or weekends, as we know that they put in. So between February and June of 2019, we're hoping to pilot these 4 different micro-credentials and gather some information about construct validity and usability. For construct validity, we would like to have 240 principals enrolling in all 4 of the micro-credentials. So just to clarify, because that's a little bit confusing, we would like 60 people for each of the 4 leadership for equity micro-credentials. So one user or one principal could sign up for just one of those micro-credentials, or they could sign up for all 4 of the micro-credentials. It's kind of up to them and how they would like to sign up for the micro-credentials. And we're recruiting for this work nationally, as I mentioned, so that we have a good diversity of users to try out this new opportunity. When we're doing the construct validation work, we're not asking people to do anything but really complete the micro-credentials. What we would like them to do is have a really authentic experience and then submit and get their scores. And then we will examine the scores on the back end to see how the scores cluster together. For the usability testing, we are going to sample just a few of the principals or assistant principals that may sign up for the micro-credential work and conduct interviews with them as they're interacting with the platform. And so that's something that we would like to do to gain some information about usability. Some of the questions related to construct validity and usability are listed here on the screen. And in the interest of time, I won't read them for you, but these are the types of questions that we're hoping to gather information about through the study. And we hope to close the study in June, provide the design team a comprehensive report of our findings, and then they can use that to refine the micro-credentials further in order to move that out into the market.
Well, thank you, Matt. I am fielding a lot of questions right now asking about the recruitment. So I'm going to go to the slide right now. And as Matt said, we are right now recruiting for this. Prior to the webinar, those registered for the webinar, Emily Shoup sent you out a flyer that has the information about the micro-credential and our efforts to recruit. To clarify, in the recruitment, we are looking for principals. A principal who participates in the pilot will only do one of the micro-credentials. They're not going to do all four. And we're doing the pilot between February 1st and June of this year. And we have to do it during that time period because the activities of the micro-credentials, which are tailored to principals and assistant principals, have to occur during the school year. They'll be engaging with their staff and students and collecting data as part of that professional development process. We ask that if you know of a principal or assistant principal, or you are one watching this webinar right now, please just contact me at Erika Hunt right here. We'll send this out afterwards, so you'll have my contact information as well as my phone number. We just need the name of the principal or the assistant principal, their contact information, and the name of the school where they work. We are recruiting until January 25th, Friday, January 25th. So this is kind of a fast recruitment effort. And so far we are getting a really good response on this. So we really want only people, though, that will actually follow through with completing this. Participating in the pilot is free, so they will not have any costs. They can earn this badge for free, and depending on where they are, in Illinois, we are trying to get professional development credit for each micro-credential, and in Tennessee, they've already are awarding that credit as well. And that's what we can offer with this. They will get a badge through the Bloomboard platform. As far as what this means for other states and districts, we can't control that. We are interested, though, and talking with others to see how they think that they can use this. I do want to emphasize, though, that this is not a silver bullet. This micro-credentials are just a form of professional development. I like the use of micro-credentials because they're competency-based, and you have to demonstrate or apply what you're learning, and there is some kind of feedback assessment process to it, which I think goes a little deeper than much of the professional development that we expose teachers and leaders to. But it's not a silver bullet, and we can't control for how well people are going to do with this or how seriously they're going to take it. This is not anything that's required through any certification. It's just some innovation that we are trying to get out there as a way of taking, you know, the content that was in the Tennessee playbook and giving principals and assistant principals some tools to practice and use it. This is customized for principals and assistant principals, and I know we did get a question about can this work with aspiring principals, and that would probably be difficult because there are actual activities where they have to interact with schools. Albany State University in Georgia is interested in incorporating this into their principal preparation program, but their candidates are already practicing assistant principals, so there would be an ease of that. That's not to say at some point, though, this isn't something that could also be developed and expanded through another micro-credential series that could be tailored to assistant principals. But for the sake of this, it is designed for practicing active principals and assistant principals. I know we are at 1 o'clock right now, so I want to just kind of do an assessment. Here is kind of our home stretch goals of in July and August, after we do the pilot, in which we'll be getting feedback on how their application was and what they thought of the micro-credential. We're going to reconvene the design team to review all of this and make any last minute changes. And then after that, it's going to be launched publicly on Bloomboard's platform. At that time, it's going to be available for a fee, and we don't know what the fee will be. That'll be something we'll have to work on with Bloomboard, and I think their fee will kind of depend on everything that's on the platform and the assessment process. So as I said, we're also considering the expansion of our Leadership for Equity micro-credentials to a broader audience through maybe reconvening another design team to develop it for districts, maybe for aspiring principals. But I think in order to make this really impactful, it's really important to kind of target it to a specific audience and make sure that the practices, the activities, and the assessments are customized to that. I think that's the best way to kind of move practice or really kind of resonate with the audience you're targeting. So I'm going to go to the next slide right now and just see if there's any last minute questions that we haven't answered. And at this time, if you wouldn't mind just raising your hand and asking if you want to stay on, we're happy to answer this. If anybody has a hard stop though, we can go through this chat list and see if there's any questions, pressing questions that weren't answered that we can answer for you through our email. Is there anybody with their hand raised, Emily?
I'm looking and I'm not seeing anybody. Nope, but there were a few questions in the chat I could read to you while people think about their questions and raise their hand if they need to.
Okay.
One of them was about the time commitment. You know, how long do they have to get it done? And then I would think a follow-up question would be, how much time do we anticipate it taking for the principal?
So, they will have between February 1st and June. So that's a 4-month process to complete this. But when we designed this, we had to kind of put an anticipated, grain size on it, and we designed it around 12 weeks. So it could likely take them much more. They have that 4-week to be part of the pilot. When this is launched on Bloomboard's platform, though, they have, they have, it's based on their self-pacing. So there is no kind of time limit on taking it. I think often you find with micro-credentials that if you don't keep up with it, then often you don't finish it, is what we hear of other states like Tennessee that's piloted micro-credentials with teachers. But there is no time frame. But for the sake of this pilot where we have to collect the data, we need them to be able to complete it by June. As far as principal or any selection criteria, we're just looking for principals and assistant principals. There's no school performance demographic or anything like that. We are hoping to get principals from around the country, and so far we're getting from many different states, which is really exciting. And we're getting, rural, suburban, urban. We're getting all sorts of school levels, and so we will be kind of tracking some data from them on some characteristics like, how long they've been a principal, what level they are, just for the sake of the evaluation of trying to look at this by certain demographics, but there's no criteria that would keep them out of it. They do have to be a practicing principal or assistant principal to be able to do the activities though, and we can't have anybody in central administrative jobs right now, but that's on the horizon of potential interest. And as we said, the principal doesn't have to do all 4, they just have to do 1 of the 4. And that's why we're trying to get 60 per them.
Okay, there was another question along the lines of, will there be a community of people who are working on this together, or is it strictly an individual effort? Do you anticipate bringing anybody together?
Well, for the sake of this pilot, we are not developing a community, but that is something that a district or a state could do if they were to utilize the micro-credential when it's live on the Bloomboard platform. I think that's the benefit of it, is we're trying to develop something that can be really generalized and used for various purposes, and we're trying not to limit it. But for the sake of this pilot, we're not going to be able to do any kind of learning community. There are learning supports by Bloomboard staff on the platform that's offered to anybody that does a micro-credential, but not specific to the topic.
Okay. One other question that I think was kind of touched on before, but want to make sure was, do you see earned micro-credentials making a difference for educators as they try to move up in their career, for instance? Do they help them get jobs in real life?
And I think that varies. Like I said, we are developing this for a specific purpose in Illinois with our grant and partnering with Tennessee. But I know that other states and universities and even districts are seeing a lot of potential in micro-credentials as a way of using these for career advancement. And so, as I said with this, we tried to develop this in a way that it's not limiting. And we want to provide those opportunities to organizations to customize and utilize this in a way that would best meet their needs.
Okay. And then let's see, somebody asked if we will provide FAQ based on the questions asked during the webinar and in our chat.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we can do that.
Yeah. And is there any thought around how to make this something where the leaders demonstrate growth over time?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that's something we investigate afterwards, especially as we kind of learn about how other organizations are using the micro-credential. But for the purpose right now of this, we have not developed it as a way for leader to demonstrate growth over time. There are some examples in the micro-credential after they complete it of next steps of what they can do on their own, like suggestions of how to take some of this and involve their staff or continue with it. But we don't have any kind of accountability piece or monitoring piece in place, unfortunately.
Okay, I think the only other question that we might want to dig into and include in our FAQ is what we anticipate costs would be after the pilot for somebody to participate, so people can budget accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can do that. We can have a discussion with Bloomboard. That might depend, though, on how this develops through the pilot process and what the final product looks like. So.
Okay, I think that's most of the questions that were out there. Other ones we might have to dig into a little bit. I'm not seeing any hands raised, so.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for taking time to listen to this. We will follow up with everybody afterwards through email, and I'm happy to answer or field any questions that you have. Thank you everybody for your interest in this exciting work we're doing.